Hi, everyone. On behalf of Curl Sask, I'd like to welcome you to another recorded SGI Drive for Gold webinar. The topic we'll be discussing today is managing stones. So a number of things we'll try and touch on throughout the discussion today. We're going to talk about just the detection piece of it, important factors in trying to detect stones or outlier stones that we may come across, how we go about that, when we may go about that or have the opportunity to do so, potential differences. We'll have a little discussion about and clarification about that, whether it's line, weight, or in a lot of cases both that may be involved, and then getting into the actual management of it. So the mindset and what that sometimes does look like and what maybe it should look like, who's getting some of these stones that we may detect and when or why, the tracking of it, and of course, really important kind of a little discussion on stones versus ice as well in that aspect. Okay, so in talking about detection first, obviously that's the first step and an important step, and the first thing I think we'll touch on again just goes back to something that we've heard a lot in past webinars and whatnot, and thus I think needs to be echoed the importance of is technical excellence, and basically. This too, anything with respect to rocks, matching rocks, and detection of rocks, really does start with technical excellence and the ability to, repeatedly and consistently, throw the rock on the line that you intend, with the weight and the rotation that you're wanting over and again, on a consistent basis, and so again goes back to kind of the important foundation of being as technically sound as individual athletes and obviously as whole teams, to be better also at identifying stones and which ones may be average or normal and which ones may not be, basically. So again, really important to practice this. I think not enough emphasis is put on this, and even practices to specifically go out and match a set of stones, and you can tie that really into as a team, as when you have all 4 members or 5 members or whatnot there, or the coach. That can be built into your pregame practice, for example, and getting feedback obviously on line from the brush holder, weight from the thrower, weight from the sweepers, the timer, maybe you're using a speed trap, what have you, but just again practicing that repetition and working it in doing so on your technical abilities, but also building that into, on purpose matching stones or practicing your last stone draw and things of that nature. I mean, now's a perfect time to see just how important that is, as well as a skill, and that weighs heavily on the technical aspect and also your ability to detect and match the stones that you're throwing in that given day. So very important. And certainly can be done as well, practiced as a skill as well when you're alone practicing, which is also important. We know that's important because you have the opportunity to get more reps in when you're alone, and necessary reps to really kind of cement in and practice those technical skills, the small differences and the weight control and things of that nature, that are also so important. So, whether that's going through a set of pylons, you can add another one, just several feet after your release where the rock is nearly missing, to make sure that the release part is good, and even putting one further down the ice that you're getting by as a break point kind of check as well. But definitely can get a lot of feedback on repetition, on lines and things of that nature when you're alone too. And you can even have a speed trap handy, just one set of traps handy just after release too, that give you at least a number of the speed to help you out with that when you're practicing solo as well. So again, really important to practice that. Second really important point of the detection piece, obviously, in addition to the technical part, is the ice reading or the ice mapping part. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later as well. But definitely need to know, what the sheet of ice is doing, and any of its intricacies or tendencies as well, to make an informed decision on the stones that you're throwing also. So that's obviously another really important piece. When we talk about detection too, there are obviously times that we have opportunities to check rocks, work on that, and become comfortable with what's going to be happening, whether it be a game or a practice or a pre-competition practice. So with pre-competition practices, and we won't get too involved with that because that can be a topic in and of itself, obviously. But a lot of events, provincial, more major provincial, or certainly national events, do have pre-competition practices where you get 10 or so minutes per sheet to have a little practice basically. And some of those, maybe not all of them, but one or two of those sheets may be more of a goal of checking the set of rocks that you may play with in your first game, for instance, or first couple of games. So again, really important to if that's a goal on that sheet, to work on looking at those rocks, matching, detecting anything, and getting that information to start your competition off right, with the set of rocks that you may be beginning the first game or two with, basically. It's interesting. I mean, as you go, you may end up having some information on rocks that you're going to use again in a competition, and I always, nice as a starting point to have some information if you do have access to that. I caution you a little bit though with respect to the actual pre-competition practice. It's also nice to have an open mind and then maybe cross-reference that, during or after, basically, but not have preconceived notions when you're going into that, because it's amazing what you can kind of see with a bit of a bias already. So I think, in my opinion, I would say use that information, maybe check with it after and confirm or reconfirm, or maybe that's changed, rather than having that kind of bias going into that as well. Obviously pre-game practices are very important for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's in a lot of cases that may determine hammer. So you're trying to win last rock with the last stone draw, trying to have good last stone draws for ranking purposes, as we've seen, very important, obviously, in certain events today. Trying to get a feel for weight, what kind of the normal weight is, and start that feel for everyone, and communication for the rest of the game based on some of that work that's done in the pregame practice. But also another really important aspect is the rocks as well, and an opportunity for everyone to potentially throw your two rocks that you'll be playing with on the same line up and back, and have a couple checks at really seeing if they are similar, and or if not, what's different about them, and beginning that management of them, whether they stay the same or that you move them around or whatnot for that game, basically, but learning about them and being better able to manage them. And I think that the more technically advanced and sound the team is, it's not really an age thing per se, I think, but it's probably more of a skill level thing. But the more advanced they are, probably the more important that is, compared to, trying to map the sheet and checking certain spots throughout the sheet and so on and so forth. Obviously, like I say, the technical part you want to keep working on, and obviously should keep improving continuously, as important as it is. And even more emphasis when the team is at a point where they are able to and skilled enough to do these detections and find differences in amongst the stones as well for them, for sure. And then with respect to the game, take advantage of situations in which you may throw the same shot twice, or even more so, the same shot twice back to back, as a continual check throughout the game for those stones. And it's funny. It's you can start to see, and at times throughout a game, those rocks may change a little bit as well. When the ice starts to flatten out a little bit as the game progresses, the pebble changes, the conditions may change. Certainly that can, rocks can change, or the properties of rocks, certain rocks can come out even during a game, not only during a whole event, but during a specific game. So just, again, taking advantage of those moments when you have checks, having a good handle on them to start, very important, obviously. And keeping that open mind as you go, but also being honest with yourself with respect to, first of all, the ice and what you know about it, but also the throws and the technical part as well, and being truthful in that sense as well. And I think the other thing about a game too, and again, maybe for more advanced teams, but with respect to the opposition, if you're doing a little bit of timing, or if you're seeing some really, uncharacteristic misses, or maybe, something that just isn't normal from the opposition, that might just be an alert too, especially if that's, a sheet you're going to be back on with their rocks, if they're predetermined as well. So just little things to kind of keep in mind as you go, watching what the opposition is doing with respect to not only their shots, but also how they're handling things as well out there. And then just a little piece on scouting. So, sometimes, again, as we get more advanced, as you're getting into a provincial or national championship, you may want to do a little bit of scouting and see how other teams are throwing rocks, what orders they're throwing rocks in, watching for other teams, changing rocks, a thrower grabbing a different stone for certain shots, for instance, changing from the start of the game to the end of the game, or somewhere in the midst of a game. And again, patterns or uncharacteristic struggles or misses, and those may obviously not be rock related, but just little alerts again there, and little notes as to maybe checks that you may do in the future, or maybe stones that you do, if you have a choice, try and stay away from as well. Okay, so just some potential differences, and these are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll just touch on briefly as well. But obviously, rocks can be different, and I won't get, again, too much into the actual makeup of them, and obviously there's different types and different types of granite and all of that, but I think what's important, is, again, it comes back to being able to really get a good grasp on the ice, and being as technically efficient as individually and as a team you can be, to pick up little things. And obviously, rocks can be different as far as line, or show differences that way. So certainly the two there would be a straight rock, or one that curls less than a normal amount, basically, or what you've deemed as a normal amount or average amount. Second one is the curl, or if it's a cutter, curls more than a normal amount or average amount, basically. And so those would be kind of the weight, the line only differences. The weight only obviously could be slow or fast, really two differences there. So, not traveling as far with the same speed of throw, or traveling further than you expect, basically. And then, of course, very commonly we see both intermixed in a stone. So a rock, I would say the two most common in that sense would be a rock that's straighter and faster, or slower and tends to curl more. I mean, those are definitely the two most common instances when we see both weight and line affected, compared to what you've kind of deemed as an average amount for both. Less common, but not unheard of, would be a rock that's straight and slow. And I haven't seen too much of those personally, but it does come up, and we saw one that was really noticeable this year, actually in the pre-trials, and that I have to think, and I'm not 100% sure on this, but I have to think that's either due again to the qualities of the stone itself, or a bit of reconditioning that went, that didn't take quite fully, or something along those lines, because obviously that's not very common, but you do see that on occasion. And even less common, I would say, what is the fast stone that actually curls a little bit more as well. And again, have seen that on a few instances, but very, certainly not as common, and not something that you'll see a lot of as well. Okay, so having talked about that, I want to just get in a little bit to just the management part, and there's a lot here, basically. And the first point I want to talk a little bit about is just the mindset of it. The first point about that is that the difficulty with rocks that may be different in a set of 8 that you have to throw, or if it's mixed doubles, even the 5 that you have to throw, really is when you haven't got them detected yet. That's really the tough part. But once you have picked up on something, maybe about how much fast it is, or how much different speed it is, or how much different line it is, it really then is becomes a little bit more of a mindset situation, because when it shouldn't be as much of a problem, basically. And I would even go as far as to say sometimes it can be your advantage, depending on the situation, depending on what's going on with it. But in a lot of cases, knowing that there may be a little difference sometimes can actually affect you in a positive way, where it just forces the player to focus a little bit more. And so, in some instances, if you're not, focusing on the rock and the difference, and how am I gonna, I've got a bad rock, or whatnot. It's some players are defeated right from the get-go, whereas others that take it as a bit more of a challenge, or just see it as it's a difference and I'm going to adjust accordingly, seem to do better with that. So I think for line differences, or line issues with a rock, communication is key with that, and just making sure that the thrower, the sweepers, and especially the broom holder, the skip are on the same page with that. And I'll give you an example. So if you've got a rock that, say, you've deemed maybe curls a little bit more, just making sure the skip starts with giving a little bit more margin there with the ice. If it's a rock you're trying to get by a guard with, err on the side of giving a little bit more. And then when you've got it exactly figured out, you can fine tune that as to how much more ice you need to give, for instance. Just building that into the skipping and the ice reading and the icing, to ensure that it's not, really a disadvantage for you in that sense. Weight differences, think about in terms of where the aim point is, again, versus kind of concentrating on the fact that the rock is different and taking that approach. So, for example, if it's a slower rock, maybe it's a rock that's 5 or so feet slower, and you're asked to kind of, place one top 12. Well, think of throwing to the tee line then, and really, dial in on kind of the aim points and throwing it there as if it was a normal rock, and then allow that to make up the difference in the rock, basically. And if you think about it that way versus in a more negative way, it really kind of just becomes a similar shot as well, for you, and with respect to kind of that reference point that you hopefully have, either with the other rock or just in general, with the event and practices. So I think that's really important. The mindset part is hugely important. And I think it's also important in discussing our next point, who gets the stones. If you found 1 or 2 that are maybe outliers, who or when, how do you deal with them, basically? And I think the first point there is, potentially is who's going to deal with them the best. And a lot of that does go back to the mindset. Who's going to take it on as a challenge, or who can kind of, put a positive spin on it, or almost, uses that a positive to be forced to concentrate more, focus more, and do good things, and can still, get good outcomes with stones that may be a little more abnormal compared to the average stones in the set, for instance. So really important with that. It might depend on the stone and how they're different as well, obviously, as far as who gets and when they're thrown. Positionally, a lot of teams will do that positionally. Sometimes it's the lead, sometimes it's the front end, sometimes it's not. Sometimes those are saved, again, depending on the qualities of the stones as well. You may try and match similar outliers together, for instance, right? So, if there are a couple rocks that, both seem to curl more, you might put those together so that it's, somebody's throwing 2 rocks that are a little bit more similar as well. There's a lot of ways to look at that. Also, you may also, I think my opinion is that it becomes really difficult to give a person, if you've detected that you have a straight fast rock and a slow rock that curls more, really difficult to give the same person those 2 stones, just because there's such a wide range there, with kind of the average or normal in between, that it's a little tougher to reference, right? So having that one stone as a reference, still to normal for the communication part and for the feel part for that person, can be nice sometimes. Just beware of having 2 extremes to the same person, for instance, and again, or passing those off, if they are vastly different, as well. So yeah, I mean, it again depends on the stones, right? If you have a straight rock, it might be the opportunity for instance, the lead to use on the first rock of the end. Probably half of those shots are not going to be shots where another rock may even be in play, right? So the ability to kind of almost get rid of that rock off the get-go sometimes is a good one. And obviously the straight rocks are the ones that can be the toughest or the most challenging, because in some cases they can be the most detrimental, just because we're playing the sport of curling, and it's called curling for a reason, right? So definitely those ones can be sometimes the biggest challenge, and I know was our thought always to try and, when we could, get rid of those with the lead's first rock, just because a lot of those shots, it could really be taken into account, and you weren't affected by trying to follow another stone, for instance, or get to a similar spot of another stone that maybe had an easier time doing that. I would be wary of, and again, probably depends on the game and the score and whatnot. You see some teams trying to save a rock that may be tougher to deal with in a straight way for a hit. And you have to be, with the 5 rock rule, you have to be very careful of that too, unless you know you're going to have a hit down the road. Be very careful of doing that. It still might be best to use earlier for sure, as you just might not have a hit later on unless you're way up in a game, in which case then it's a pretty safe bet, for instance. You may also have the thought in mind of how your teammates throw, how everyone throws the rock. If someone typically gets a lot more curl than another person on their throws, you can also think of that as a way of assigning the stones with what you have. You might want to give them a little straighter rock because they still might get a little bit more curl than someone else on the team, for instance. So that's also another factor or thought to keep in mind when dealing with that too. Rocks that for instance may curl a little bit more. Probably depends on the speed of them, right? So if the speed seems fine on those, you'll often see, and nowadays you probably will see on TV and when you're watching, a lot of times back end or even the skips will keep those, just because rocks that curl a little bit more, not as detrimental as the straight ones in that you can use them to get around guards, get to rocks maybe that you couldn't otherwise and whatnot. So they can almost be used a bit of as an advantage, as long as the person throwing again is comfortable with that, with throwing it that, with adjusting the ice accordingly to take that into account. And I think typically you'll see that when the speeds are relatively close. When the speed becomes a little bit more of an issue, then oftentimes you won't see the back ends necessarily have those or want to keep those as much, although that's not always true. Again, that will come down to kind of comfort level of the player and the ability to make those adjustments basically as well. Okay, and then a little talk about the tracking or verifying, and that really comes down to just kind of charting or keeping what we used to call as a rock book, making notes on things, both the order that you throw them and just little notes on what you saw, and really you can be as specific. I'd urge you to be as specific as you can or want to be with respect to this. Start talking in terms of degrees or weight, distances that maybe rocks were different if it was a weight issue, or how much they were different as far as line, referencing either a distance on that or a rock width or something along those lines. Just anything, however specific you need to be, so that for future reference, whether it be later in that same event or even future events, that may very well come in handy as well, as some of these rocks do tend to, more than others, but do tend to keep these properties and can hold as beneficial information going forward for you. So it's basically making notes on that, and getting in the habit of doing that, assigning someone that role, and thus also having that discussion after games, before games, after games, and so on of how you're going to manage the stones that you do have. I would even say, I know for me personally, there were events I even went as far as including in that document kind of the ice and little tendencies of the ice, and even drawing that out a little bit, just so I remembered and knew and felt like I had a bit of an edge or a good lead up, I guess, the next time kind of we were there within that same event, right? So yeah, you can be certainly as as detailed as you want, and probably no such thing as too detailed when it comes to the tracking and making notes on these things, for sure. You just saw at the Olympics there, when you have a full team behind you, we're getting to the point where we're keeping track of individual rocks as a percentage, not just the people throwing them, but the actual individual rocks as a percentage. And just again, little hints. There's lots of factors that may go into that, right? It doesn't tell the whole story, obviously. The people throwing them, the ice, the ice that was given, and there's a lot that goes into that. So you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But that being said, certainly gives some idea of what might be a tougher stone to deal with, or a more challenging stone that takes more to deal with it versus others, basically. So interesting where we're getting to in that sense. And then, certainly you see changes during, like we'd mentioned, changes during a game, and certainly over the course of an event. As during a game, as the ice, you wear the ice in, the rocks sometimes do change a little bit and show different tendencies, when the pebble is knocked down and conditions change, or it gets frosty or what have you. And for sure throughout an event, no question about that either, especially events where the rocks have been sanded or conditioned beforehand. You definitely see that as well. And there's times even, and as we go, when you get more and more competitive, and some of us experiencing this at different events as well. But a lot of times now there's reconditioning of the stones and the running surfaces during the event, just to maintain an appropriate amount of curl without having to try and clip the pebble lower, for instance, or take the risk of the ice becoming flat to try and add more curl. They're just dealing with the rocks in a sense to try and maintain a level of curl throughout a longer event, basically. So and that can change, that in itself can change the qualities a little bit as well. So just lots of things to think about, lots of things to learn with respect to that. Again, just a testament of how important it is to be, to have the technical and the ice reading components to be able to detect these things and keep practicing that skill. And then, of course, very, very important, obviously, is the stones versus the ice. And we've touched on this a little bit, but the importance of mapping the ice, reading the ice, need to know that component of it as well. So, non-uniform curl or straight can certainly and more commonly be caused by ice qualities. You can't point the finger at the stones, obviously, all the time, nor should you, without knowing the ice really well first. I think that's hugely important. So the shape, it can be, there's instances where it's not quite level. There may be little ridges or little scraper lines, depending, dished ice, high center lines, 4-foot lines, things along those lines. All little things, obviously ice makers have a million challenges, and as much as they're trying to make it, as uniform and flat and whatnot as possible, sometimes just given the circumstances, it isn't possible. And the circumstances are many, and that makes it really difficult as well. So, every sheet's a little different. And I think, again, the importance of, having that, basically three-dimensional view in mind as a skip or an ice reader, trying to figure those things out is again very helpful and important in that sense. And then again, the importance of the throws and watching throws and taking advantage of watching throws in the same path, for instance, to get a really good idea of that, of the stones, right? And almost in a sense, those ones so important because those take the ice out of play a little bit, as it should be the same in the same spot. So taking advantage of those when you see them and can compare. And then, of course, all those instances that you control, the pre-competition practice, the pre-game practice, where you have the ability to do that. And again, the technical excellence that we've basically just come full circle to. So very important. So hopefully helpful. A few little hints and tips just on rocks and how to approach and maybe manage them. Open for discussion, obviously, as per always. So feel free, if there's any questions or discussion, comments at all, feel free to contact me at any point in time. Love to chat about it with you. Yeah, hopefully a little bit of help on that. I thought it timely as we're watching all this curling, both provincial, national coming up, and Olympic curling. We see lots of these types of things, and lots of management happening, obviously, at these high levels, and certainly starts at younger ages and lesser advanced levels, as these are important skills to develop going forward. So thanks so much for your time and tuning in, and look forward to seeing you all and chatting with you again here soon. Take care.